3, 2, 1, 0. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue.
I'm at the foot of the ladder. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Beautiful view. Magnificent sight out here.
Welcome to Curiosityness, episode 61, the fourth and final part of the moon landing 50th anniversary series that I'm doing. And by I mean me, and I am Travis DeRose, the host of the show that you're listening to. And on this episode, for the fourth part of the moon landing series, I have on Rick Houston. And Rick is the author of Go Flight, the Unsung Heroes of Mission Control. And is just a great author who's written a ton of books about NASA and also NASCAR for that matter. But we're talking about NASA in this part. And he just explains what it was really like to be in mission control and gives it, kind of shines a light on the people who worked at mission control, because sometimes their work can be clouded by the astronauts and they're not as public. So it's really fun to hear Rick talk about this because he studied it so in depth. And Rick also serves as the technical advisor, and he was an extra on the set for the film First Man, which came out recently about Neil Armstrong. And also this book that he wrote, Go Flight, inspired a documentary that was called Mission Control, the Unsung Heroes of Apollo. So Rick's very qualified for this. He knows a lot of info, and it was really fun to talk to him. So hope you enjoy this final installment of the moon landing 50th anniversary, and here we go. What's up, Rick? How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you, Travis?
Doing good. Thank you. I'm pretty excited to talk to you. You've had kind of a cool, fun career involved with NASA and NASCAR, and it just seems like you cover some very fun, exciting stuff.
Well, I've been very fortunate to kind of pursue two of my life's passions, NASCAR and NASA. I've always been fascinated by ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and certainly there's nothing more extraordinary than flying in space and driving a race car at 200 miles an hour.
Yes, very true. It's just so crazy. And gotta say, with a name like Rick Houston, I think it just sounds like you're qualified.
Yeah. It's funny you mention that, because honestly and truly, that is kind of what got me interested at first in the space program, because when I was a kid, I was probably 5 or 6 watching one of the later moon landings with my mom. My dad was in Vietnam at the time, mm-hmm. and I watched it on the news, and I thought it was cool that every other word that they said seemed to be Houston. Right. And in my mind, in my 4 or 5 year old mind, they were talking to me. Right. So ever since then, I've just been, intrigued by spaceflight. Yeah, that's pretty fun, because, even when, someone is talking to someone else, but they call your name, you always look and are paying attention. So when you hear your last name called on TV like that so often, that's got to be very exciting for a kid, for sure. Well, I will say this: the whole Houston we've had a problem thing kind of got old. The first 2,000 times that I heard it, it was funny. But since then, maybe not so much. Yes, that's a good point. I can only imagine how often people think they're being so clever with that, but you've heard it so many times. Oh yeah. I can assure you, it's not the first time. Right. Well, I'll avoid that here, so we don't have to sit through that, luckily. But let's just start with, I'd love to hear kind of your story and your background and what you've done and how you got involved with, covering NASCAR and NASA and, any other stuff. Like, I guess what's kind of your quick bio, or what do you, when someone asks what you do, what do you generally tell them? Well, number one, I don't have a quick bio, man. It took a long time to to get to the point where I was able to write a book like Go Flight, and certainly be involved in a film like Mission Control. But basically, the basics is I'm from Nashville, Tennessee originally, and I wanted to get into NASCAR. So I moved from Nashville, Tennessee to North Carolina. Went to a couple of races and was sneaking food out of the press box, sleeping in my car, trying to make ends meet. Went to the next race and found out that they didn't serve food in the press box until Sunday, and got there on Friday. So I slept in my car that Friday night, and it was I had a pretty serious talk with God.
Yeah.
And I wound up that weekend getting a contact with a guy who gave me my first real job in journalism at a little newspaper in the hills of North Carolina. I took that job at the little newspaper and stayed there 2 years, basically learning the trade. And after that, I got my dream job with a publication called Winston Cup Scene, which was at that time basically the New York Times of the NASCAR world.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So when you said you wanted to go out and kind of get involved with NASCAR, was it always to kind of be a journalist and report on it, or did you ever? Okay.
Yeah.
You never felt the drive to drive?
Oh, no. No, I have been able to take a few of the driving schools. And I found out that as a race car driver, I made a really good journalist. I don't have what it takes to drive that fast, that close to so many other people.
Yeah, it is. It's just incredible when you truly do, think about it and look at what they're doing. It's crazy. And yeah, I got a chance to drive, like a race car, NASCAR kind of style car in, we have where's the track? It's in, like the desert in California here, about a 2-hour drive from me. But just one of those things where, they let you drive a few laps around and stuff. And it was extremely fun. But literally the guy, I'm in the car. I don't know how to drive a manual. I have an automatic. And the guy's just telling me to he's on the headset telling me to floor it or brake or anything like that. Telling me to do everything. But it's still, it's scary at first and then it gets fun, but it's just so much adrenaline. It is crazy. Oh, yeah. And you can really appreciate what's really going on for how long are these races sometimes?
500 miles mostly.
Man, but how long does that take generally?
Maybe 3.5 hours, 3.5 hours.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And they just have to keep just incredible, intense focus that entire time, right?
Well, there's the age-old debate whether or not race car drivers are actually athletes. I would challenge somebody who says that a race car driver is not an athlete to strap in and hang on for 3.5 hours. And I would assure you that after that 3.5 hours was over, that critic would be a believer.
Yeah, anyone who experiences it. Okay, cool. So you got into this, you got your first real job, you're figuring out journalism and reporting for NASCAR and stuff like that. And you're there for 2 years. And then where do you kind of go from there?
I went to a newspaper called Winston Cup Scene,
right?
Which was the really, really big NASCAR newspaper. The weekly newspaper that I had been working for had a circulation of less than 5,000. And Winston Cup Scene, the week after I started there, we went over 100,000 in paid circulation.
Nice.
So it truly had a national reach, which was kind of eye-opening.
Yeah, that must have been very exciting. So what kind of stuff were you doing there? Were they just sending you to races and you were reporting on it and writing about it?
Oh yeah, I traveled the circuit, went to every racetrack. Actually went to Japan for the first exhibition race over there. And it was really a cool gig. It was really a cool gig for a NASCAR buff like me. But it turned into a job really quickly. I was at the track when Adam Petty lost his life in a crash during practice, and that was a really bad, really dark day.
Yeah, man. So, wow. I mean, when you say that it turned into a job quickly, do you mean that it became kind of the novelty wore off and the fun wore off, and it just became something that you were almost forced to do?
I don't want to say forced, but it became more serious because that was in May of 2000. In July of 2000, we lost another driver at the very same racetrack. And then in October of that year, a driver in the truck series was killed. And then finally, Dale Earnhardt, a 7-time champion, was killed on the last lap of the Daytona 500.
Oh my gosh!
So that was 4 fatalities in less than a year, and it became everybody was trying to get to the bottom of it. Everybody was trying to come up with all these safety ideas, and it was just a very volatile time in the sport.
Wow! Yeah, I can imagine that would just have what kind of shift or change in attitude or any kind of regulations did that have on NASCAR as a whole?
Oh, it was huge. It was very huge. And I think that one of the biggest reasons was that Dale Earnhardt himself was very set in his ways, and he had refused to try some of the safety things that went into effect after he lost his life. And since then, NASCAR has mandated the use of the Hans device. Tracks are now lined with what are called safety barriers, safer walls, soft walls, if you will. The cars have been basically redesigned. And since that day in Daytona in February of 2001, not a single NASCAR driver has been in a fatal accident. Not a single driver has been killed in NASCAR since that day.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
Oh yeah.
Wow. And is it completely attributed to these new safety regulations? Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's and I think now we're kind of in a situation where they have a I don't want to say a false sense of security, but now I think a lot of the drivers think that they're 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and don't mind running into another driver because their cars are. They think that their cars are completely safe, and the sport still is very dangerous. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. How I could see how that kind of mindset would come about, where it's been, almost 20 years now without a fatality. Yeah. So you could see how drivers would start to push the limit more and more. And hopefully, unfortunately, it doesn't lead to we don't need another, fatality to wake these people up again. But wow.
Well, I hope not too.
Yeah. So since that happened, are the cars relatively the same, like performance wise, or are they getting faster or anything like that?
Well, no, they're basically, since Dale Earnhardt's accident, the cars have been completely redesigned.
Oh, okay.
And they almost don't appear to even be anywhere near what they were on that day.
Okay.
They're very sleek. And I'm not a mechanic, so I can't tell you all the the mechanical issues. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know all the engineering issues. But the safety modifications have just been absolutely phenomenal.
That's great. That's extremely important. Yeah. And so now, are they are all the cars kind of standardized? Like, is there like kind of a maximum amount of horsepower and stuff that you can have?
Yes. NASCAR, they redid the aerodynamic package this year. Mm-hmm. And they have also done away with what's called a restrictor plate, and used tapered spacers to limit the horsepower. So the cars are very similar. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people have, a little bit of an issue with that, because a lot of people like certain particular manufacturers. In other words, they're either Ford fans or Chevy fans, mm-hmm. Or Dodge fans who's, that make is no longer in the sport, but mm-hmm. They follow a certain manufacturer. So okay. They would rather see it go back to a more stock car.
Okay. I see. Interesting. So things are, I've watched some documentaries on like Le Mans and stuff like that. And that, it seems very much like the cars are different, and it's almost like the car wins the race, where, like you have the Porsche team and everything like that, and the car is very important. But for NASCAR, was it, or is it maybe more where the cars are all similar or pretty much the same, and it's more the skill of the driver that is the differentiating factor?
Well, I would certainly never, ever take a driver out of the equation, whether it be NASCAR or Le Mans or F1 or IndyCar, because it takes an unbelievable skill, almost superhuman skill, to be able to handle a machine like that. Mm-hmm. In NASCAR, you're talking, I think they're 3,500 pounds now, 3,400 pounds now. I couldn't tell you exactly, but it takes a very certain special skill to be able to sit in, strap in, and turn that motor over and go racing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, it's something I kind of want to. I don't obviously want to be a competitive racer, but I would love to get into more, going to a local track or something like that, and just in trying some racing. It seems very fun because, we have like K1 Speed or go-kart and stuff like that, which is extremely fun. So I would love to get into some like recreational stuff and really learn, how to follow the correct race line and all that stuff. It seems like a fun recreational thing to get into.
Yeah. If and when you do that, you better make sure to have a whole lot of money, because they say there's a saying in NASCAR that the greatest way to make a small fortune in racing is to start out with a really big one. Yeah, that's encouraging. That's fun. Yeah. So even at the local level, you're talking thousands of dollars.
Okay. Maybe I'll keep on my go-karting for now. That satisfies it enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Stick with your podcasting career.
Yes. Yeah. This is good too. Okay. Cool. Thanks for sharing it. That was. I've always been interested in that stuff, so that's very cool. So when did you're covering NASCAR and stuff? When did kind of NASA come into the equation?
My interest in space flight was kind of rekindled in 1995 when the movie Apollo 13 came out. And then 3 years after that, John Glenn, who was one of the original Mercury astronauts, he flew board the space shuttle, and of course there was a lot of news coverage about that. Mm-hmm. So from that point on, I had kind of a dual obsession. I was covering NASCAR. I was living in the NASCAR world, but I also was very, very passionate about human spaceflight. I'm not the kind of person who can just have an interest in something. It's not enough for me to be able to read a book about a subject, put it down, and that be it. When I get really interested in something, I dive in head first. And, so I had to learn everything that I could about spaceflight, watched all the documentaries, read all the books, talked to all the people, all that kind of thing. So it wound up that I got out of NASCAR in 2004.
Okay.
And needed a job. Mm-hmm. And just so happened to be able to start freelance writing.
Okay.
And one of the message boards that I was on a lot, in the space community and the NASA community, an author, a book editor, posted on that message board that he needed writers to fill out a book that his publisher had planned about the Apollo moon landings.
Oh, okay.
And of course, I was interested.
Yeah.
So I sent him a message, and basically, I and maybe one other person that responded were actually professional writers. Several of the other people who responded were basically space fans with some knowledge and the same kind of passion that I had. So I was assigned the chapter on Apollo 11, which was the first moon landing. I didn't really want to take it, to be honest with you, because that was a story that had been told so many other times, millions and millions of other times. So in my mind, what was I going to be able to add that was new,
right,
and interesting to the reader? But the editor kind of talked to me and asked me to take it, and I wound up. It was actually kind of neat. I wound up taking the angle of the worldwide attention that was paid to the flight of Apollo 11. So I interviewed people from around the world, literally. Who had watched and tuned in and wanted and were some of the literally hundreds of millions of people that were watching the moon landing and later the moon walk.
Yeah.
I actually talked to my dad. My family, mom, dad, and I were actually living in Japan at the time of Apollo 11 because he was in the Army, and so I interviewed him about being in Japan and the reaction over there, and Travis, that was actually 3 weeks to the day before he passed away.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, he had cancer, had lung cancer, and so that's a very special interview.
Yeah,
that I have. And it was actually kind of neat because when I got done with my questions about Apollo 11, I just kept recording and would. Asking questions about, all the family stories that I had heard him tell. So, I got all that. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is very cool. That's something I want to do with my family too. And something I think everybody should do, to just sit down and just ask all the questions that you've always wanted to ask that, just may have never come up before, just to kind of take that time and opportunity to learn all that stuff and record it so other people can listen to it too. Your descendants can all have that stuff. So that's very cool that you got to do that.
Don't put it off.
Yeah, don't put it off. Exactly.
Don't put it off.
Wow. Okay. And then so this you're writing this book and everything. That I love that angle of kind of talking to folks who got to experience it. And so what was kind of the what was everybody in Japan watching the footage of it too, and everybody was excited?
Yeah. That he said that everybody in Japan was huddled around TVs, that kind of thing. I talked to a guy who was actually a POW in Vietnam, and he said that they actually found out that people had landed on the moon by two means. Number one, they got letters from home that through the Red Cross that had the first man on the moon stamp. Oh,
cool.
So that was one thing. But he also said that the propaganda announcements would come over the radio, and they would the propaganda announcer would say something to the effect of America may not may be able to put a man on the moon, but they're never going to beat us. That kind of thing. They're never going to beat the Vietnamese, and all that kind of thing. So that was, a crazy way to find out. I talked to a guy who lived in behind the Iron Curtain in Czechoslovakia. So I was very pleased with how that chapter came out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it's just such a incredible step for all of humanity. So everybody's got to be watching, whether you're, American or not. But then also to feel that, to be an American and be watching in America, to feel that, kind of sense of pride and to be proud of your country and everything must just be incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're exactly right there. And there are always going to be critics, because the war in Vietnam was going on at that time. Mm-hmm. Of course, you had the civil rights movement, and then there was some criticism there. But by and large, that many people watching was one moment in time where everybody came together. Mm-hmm. All the naysayers, all the critics, their voices kind of, got quieted down a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is cool about that kind of achievement. It's not about us and them. It's not about, one country versus another. At that moment in time, it was a human achievement, even though the space race was very much a byproduct of the Cold War. If it hadn't have been for the Russians, if it hadn't have been for the Soviet Union, America would have never, ever, ever, ever stepped foot on the moon. Mm-hmm. Ever.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to look back and see the steps of what kind of happened and what caused these different things. Like, because I watched the Mission Control documentary, and pretty much everybody.
I've heard of that.
It's pretty good. Check it out.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Pretty much all of them. They kind of mentioned that Sputnik, looking up and seeing this man-made thing in the sky was really their first eye-opening, wow, what's going on? This is what's possible,
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, let's lead into Go Flight. So your book is called Go Flight. The subtitle is The Unsung Heroes of Mission Control. So why did you decide to write that?
The book, the chapter on the moon landings, led into a contract about a book on the space shuttle program. Mm-hmm. And the book on the space shuttle program led into a book about one of the astronauts. Mm-hmm. And when I was in Houston to do the interviews with the astronaut for his book, a guy that I had met, one of the flight controllers, he took me around Johnson Space Center. Took me on a tour. Mm-hmm. And he took me to the robotics laboratory, and I got to shake hands with Robonaut, and that was cool, and then he took me to the neutral buoyancy laboratory, which is the big swimming pool where the astronauts, do their training for the spacewalks. Mm-hmm. But he wouldn't let me go for a swim, so it wasn't, it was cool to see, but
right.
But Travis, then he took me to the Apollo era mission control room. Mm-hmm. And I cannot begin to tell you the feeling that just struck me between the eyes as soon as I stepped foot in the room. Huh. And I mean, I'm a history buff in general. Mm-hmm. So I have experienced that sense of history in Gettysburg. I have experienced that kind of feeling in Antietam and Dealey Plaza, where Kennedy was assassinated. Mm-hmm. And I walked into that room and I was just hammered with this sense of history. Huh. Because when Neil Armstrong said, "Houston Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed," he was talking to that room.
Yeah.
You know, when the crew of Apollo 13 announced, Houston, we've had a problem, they were talking to that room and they were looking for help.
Yep.
From that room. You know, the last words that the crew of Challenger ever spoke to Earth were spoken to that room.
Yeah.
You know, so that is history. And I'm not ashamed to say it, and I've said it many times. I had tears come to my eyes.
Yeah.
You know, because I literally did not feel worthy to be standing there. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted to do something to honor the people that had worked there. But if I'd actually written a book for every book idea that I'd ever had, you know, it would fill up 10 libraries.
Right.
But about 6 months later, I got an email from my book editor, and he asked me if I had any other ideas, any book ideas. And I said, you know, it's funny that you mentioned that. And I mentioned I mentioned the mission control idea, and I mean that one just flew through.
Yeah.
It just sailed through because it was just such a no-brainer that we do something on them.
Yeah. No, very cool. That's awesome to hear that story that you know, maybe didn't have this on your mind at all really and got to go there and that you just experienced that and felt that so much, and that led to a book to tell the story of what it was like to be in mission control. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's get into kind of what mission control is like. So, I mean, how did mission control kind of come about? Because they didn't have what it was now, like with, you know, everybody sitting in the one room facing the same way and everything initially, right? It was that kind of came about after a few missions.
No, it was pretty much a kind of like that from the very beginning in Mercury, but it basically came about due to the just absolute sheer brilliance and genius of Chris Kraft. He is the creator of mission control, the concept, the layout, so on and so forth. But it was under his tutelage that room came together. You know, so the room in Florida was very basic. It was, you know, it had I would have loved to have experienced mission control at that time, because, you know, all the knobs were, you know, they would click when they turned and everything like that.
Yeah.
You know, there was actually a display at the front of the room where they tracked the spacecraft, and it was actually pulled by basically by pulleys.
Wow.
You know, and it would move across from left to right, and then as it went on around orbit, that icon was somehow pulled to the top of the screen, pulled back to the right, pulled back to the left, dropped back down, and started tracking again.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that is the system that put America's first person in space.
Yeah.
So think about that for a second.
Right. It's just incredible to see, you know, because there was a moment when I think Chris Kraft mentioned in the documentary how he's like, well, this is what we need. We need some computers. And it's like, people were almost like, well, what's a computer? You know? Yeah. And it's just like amazing the technology that they were working with. And, you know, everyone always says whatever the thing of like the technology they used, the computer they used to put the man on the moon was, you know, 1/100th of whatever your phone is or whatever like that. But it's true. And so it must be very cool to see all that stuff and hear the clicking knobs, and it's very fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that really gets me is the people who put all this together, because Ed Findell made the comment, you know, many times he says that there was no textbook on how to learn to be a flight controller.
Yeah.
They wrote that textbook themselves.
Yeah.
And it was trial by fire, trial and error.
Yeah.
And the simulations, not everybody who was hired to be a flight controller actually got to work a mission, because the simulations weeded them out very quickly.
Yeah.
As much as I have lived in that universe the last several years, and have written about that universe in the last several years, I know just enough to know that I could never be a flight controller myself. Mm-hmm. I don't have that ability to think on my feet that quickly. That's why I'm a writer, because I have to think about the message that I'm trying to get across. Yeah. And they simply didn't have that kind of time.
No.
Because, the lives of astronauts depended many times on their decisions that were made in the matter of a few seconds.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of pressure.
That is a lot of pressure, yeah. And I can imagine it takes a very specific type of person to deal with that. And, they talked about how, there's all these different variables going on, and people are like, well, what if the heat shield is broken or something like that for Apollo 13, I think. I think Apollo 13. And he's like, well, we have no control over that. That if that's the variable that's going to bring this mission down, then we can't worry about that. We have to worry about the things that we can actually influence right now. So it's just it's very interesting to see their thought process and how they are like able to be efficient in the things that they think about, even though something they may totally not even think about could take everything down. But it's just, I find it very very fascinating to see them work through that whole process.
Oh yeah. When I think of a flight controller making a call in the heat of the moment by the seat of his pants, I really think about John Aaron and the launch of Apollo 12. And I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but 36 seconds after they left the launch pad in Florida, they were struck by lightning. Mm-hmm. A few seconds after that, they were struck by lightning again, which just threw all their platforms offline, all their electrical platforms offline. And in mission control, all they were hearing in their headsets was Pete Conrad, the commander of the mission, reading off this great big long list of malfunctions and warning lights that they were seeing in the cabin. And simulations, 2 or 3 malfunctions at one time would be excessive and would probably be cause for the test conductor to have a pretty stern lecture, in training. But here Pete Conrad was, and he was reading off a list of 7-8 things, 10, 12 things. So, and basically nobody knew what to do, but John Aaron looked at his screen and he saw the data, kind of scrambled up. And he thought to himself, I've seen that before. I saw it back about a year ago, and I think that's what it is. And he called his back room to try to confirm it. And his back room guy, who is actually one of his best friends, said, I think so, I'm not sure. And before, Jim Kelly got that out of his mouth, John Aaron was on the line to the flight director, Jerry Griffin, saying, okay, tell him to try SCE to AUX. Yeah. And Jerry Griffin had never heard of that. He had never heard of that command. Mm-hmm. They talked to Jerry Griffin told the Capcom Jerry Carr, FCE to AUX. No, SCE to AUX. Right. He didn't know what to tell him. Yeah. And so that message went up to the spacecraft. And Pete Conrad had never heard of it, but Alan Bean, who was sitting in the right hand seat next to that switch, knew where it was and flipped it, and John Aaron got his data back. And that was a decision that was made from the moment of the lightning strike to the actual flip of the switch. I want to say maybe 10 seconds.
Wow.
Maybe 15.
Yeah.
At the outside. So you think about that kind of excellence, because John Aaron had seen that pattern before, a year before, and remembered it.
I know.
And, so many people make such a big deal out of that call, but in this case, it's warranted. It's justified because it was the best seat of the pants call ever made in mission control. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Crazy. And then it happened so quickly after launch too. And then I believe they said that it was a really smooth mission after that, wasn't it?
It was a very smooth mission after that. The only thing that really happened was Alan Bean, while he was on the lunar surface, pointed the camera, the surface camera, at the sun, and it fried the circuits, and so they didn't have TV.
Oh.
And that was basically, their problem.
Right.
Now the concern became, though, that the lightning had triggered the pyrotechnics, and all the concern was that the parachutes that they needed for landing had already been triggered.
Oh.
And that they had, so when they came back, they literally did not know if they were going to have parachutes to land with.
Oh man.
Yeah. So, but it was like you said, it was one of those things that they could not control. That they, there wasn't anything that they could do about it.
Mm-hmm.
So they figured, we're going to go ahead to the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going to be any more dead, landing here than we will be if we go to the moon. So.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Man, and it's the almost like juxtaposition of being, you're in mission control, you're on land, the whole room is safe, but they're so responsible for the lives of, these 2 or 3 men that are up in that ship, and just the amount of stress and everything that goes on in that room. It just is incredible to see.
Yeah. Well, mission rule number 1 is crew safety.
Mm-hmm.
You get the crew back.
Yeah.
You do whatever you have to do. And that was a very, very serious undertaking. Mm-hmm. And they accepted that.
Yeah.
And they lived it.
Was that because they talked about how the fire during the test had such a big, it kind of had a big shift and change to the entire way they operated. Was like the crew safety being number 1, was that there before that fire, or was that kind of a result of that?
Yes. Crew safety had always been number 1.
Right.
But at the time of the Apollo 1 fire, there was also this very strong push to get people to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe they kind of let that fall by the wayside, crew safety fall by the wayside in the rush to get to the moon. And they had made everything work during Mercury. They had made everything work during Gemini. They had very serious problems during both programs. You had Gemini 8 spinning out of control, and they had that problem had managed to be fixed and not lose the crew. So maybe they became a little lax when it came to crew safety, and were in way too big a rush to get to the moon.
I see.
Yeah.
Similar to the NASCAR stuff where, there was 4 fatalities in 1 year. It's just like, unfortunately, you just kind of need a big wake-up call like that for everybody to really see the stakes and what's on the line again.
Exactly. Exactly. And I had never made that connection before, but you're exactly right. The situations were very similar.
Yeah.
You know, before the year 2000, you know, the sport had been, you know, relatively safe for a few years. There had been a couple of fatalities in 1994 over the course of 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
In February 1994, there had been a couple of incidents where drivers lost their lives. But, you know, when you see an accident in which a driver or a car flips, you know, 10, 15 times, and, you know, the driver maybe doesn't walk away, but, you know, races the next week,
Mm-hmm.
you get kind of lax when it comes to safety.
Yeah.
You know, that driver survived, so the next driver is going to survive, and that wasn't the case.
Yeah. Man. So what was it kind of like talking to, and like, I mean, when you got to talk to the people that were actually in mission control and kind of lived it, did they sort of seem to have I'm sure they were very, you know, proud and nostalgic of the time and everything, but there was one moment I noticed in the documentary where I forget who it was, but he basically said if he could go back and do it all again, he wouldn't, just because he missed so much time with his family.
That's Bob Carlton.
Bob Carlton.
And it's funny, but by and large, every single person that I talked to, if you met them on the street, you would never ever know that they once had this extraordinary job. They would basically be the grandpa in the grandstands watching these kids play basketball or baseball. You know, they're just ordinary people. But they had these extraordinary stories. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the story that Bob Carlton told. Bob Carlton dropped out of school in the 9th grade, and he joined the Air Force, took an aptitude test, got a degree, and eventually went to Auburn University and got a degree in engineering. And to talk to Bob has this awesome Alabama accent.
Yeah.
I mean, he just talks like a good old country boy. And if I can say that somebody else has a Southern accent, you know it's pretty thick.
Right.
But Bob went from being a 9th grade dropout to being in charge of Eagle's fuel supply as they landed on the moon. Mm-hmm. In the last minute or two of that landing phase, Bob was the only one who was allowed to talk on the flight loop.
Wow.
Because, you know, he had a stopwatch, and, you know, they were within 60 seconds of running out of fuel. So he called 60 seconds. And then he called standby for 30 seconds. 30 seconds. And, you know, when Eagle landed, he said that he was showing 18 seconds of fuel left.
Ooh.
You know, and I love to tell this story. And this is what it means to be a flight controller, who at home was just this ordinary guy. He meant, you know, to save this stopwatch for history. You know, because he was, you know, really and truly making history with it, and he meant to, you know, show it at 18 seconds forever. Well, his daughter got hold of it and timed her baton routine. Oh my gosh! While she was in high school with his stopwatch. You know, Bob says that he would not have done it again because it had too big of an impact on his family. But his 3 daughters, who are in their own rights just extraordinary people themselves. They insist that after 1969, when Apollo 11 landed, he was daddy again. He was the best daddy that he could have ever been, and they almost cringe when he says that on the film, because they feel that he's too hard on himself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's good. That's nice to hear that his daughters are supportive like that and are able to say that he's too tough on himself. Yeah. But yeah, it's almost like what you said before, where none of this really existed before. None of these guys grew up, knowing that they were going to be in mission control or the flight director or anything like that, where they just kind of, a lot of them had, maybe aviation backgrounds or something like that. But did these guys really know what they were getting into when they started this? No.
I mean, I think they had an idea of what it could be, of what was taking place. But probably one of my favorite lines throughout this whole process is Jerry Bostic, who was the chief of the flight dynamics branch. That was basically the section of mission control that dealt with the trajectory of the spacecraft. They basically pointed the spacecraft where it needed to go.
Okay.
And Jerry Bostic said that when they started, they simply didn't know that it couldn't be done.
Right.
And you think about that for a second. It really kind of leans on you a little bit, because if they had thought, well, we're just in this collecting a paycheck until they cancel the program, yeah, it would have probably likely never went anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But when they went to work, they were in it for real.
Yeah,
they were the real deal with a clear and concise goal, with a set deadline.
Yeah,
and they were going to get it done. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how your mindset makes such a difference on if you truly think you can do it or can't, and how it subconsciously, I think, motivates every decision you make. Where, there's so many examples, but like the 4-minute mile, where it was like, impossible for someone to break the 4-minute mile, but now it happens all the time because I don't know who the first guy was, but it was broken, so it's possible now. So let's do it.
Yeah,
it's interesting to see that kind of stuff. So that is cool. Where they were never told that it can't be done, so they made it happen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So cool. I love this stuff. And it was fun to see them talk about their splashdown parties too. And their celebration, they're just regular guys. They would all go, they'd have a lot of beer and stuff and celebrate what they had accomplished.
Yeah. I don't know that I could have hung at one of those parties. Oh,
wow.
I'm a nice Sunday school teacher. And, I don't believe that some of those splashdowns, I don't believe that I could have survived some of those splashdown parties.
Oh my gosh, that's fun.
Yeah.
And they would talk about how, you're watching the footage from Apollo 11 when they finally land on the moon, and everybody in the back room is applauding and celebrating. I'm sure the whole world's excited, but in mission control, they still have a lot to worry about. They can't break and lose focus and celebrate. They still have to worry, is the module going to tip over or anything like that? Yeah. So, there's a lot to it. They can't just always focused,
That's another awesome Bob Carlton story. When Eagle landed, when it settled down in the Sea of Tranquility, of course there was that celebration, in the viewing room.
Mm-hmm.
But on Bob's console audio, you can hear that ruckus in the background. But Bob, the entire time, never breaks character. He
mm-hmm.
never breaks out of flight controller mode.
Mm-hmm.
The whole time, he's telling these backroom people, watch the bird.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, of course, talking about eagle.
Yeah.
The whole time, one of his backroom support people, made some kind of wow comment, like that. But, Bob was settle down.
Yeah.
We got to make sure that the bird's okay,
Mm-hmm.
and just hearing him tell that story was just awesome.
Yeah. And then they would eventually have, after things seemed okay, they would have their celebration in Mission Control with, there was like 3 steps to it, wasn't it? Where they would all have a cigar or something like that.
Yeah. I think the first step, was when they saw the parachutes. The second step was when they got plucked out of the water, I think. And I'm just doing this from memory. This may not be exact, but I know that the final step was when the astronauts' feet hit the deck of the carrier.
Right.
That was the moment when for Mission Control they could really cut loose and celebrate. Because that's when they were back home. Because while they were still in the water, that spacecraft could sink, and it did on one occasion.
Oh my gosh!
Thankfully, not with the astronauts still inside, but it sank in the Atlantic Ocean, and it took them. That flight was 1961, and it took them until 1999 to recover the spacecraft.
Oh wow!
Yeah, because it was in water deeper than the Titanic.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. So, but yeah, hitting the feet, hitting the carrier deck was the final stage.
Yeah, and then they could the responsibility for the astronauts was now on the captain or of the carrier now, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, that is it's fun to see the culture and stuff, and how, they talk about, during those 2 days of Apollo 13 where, they're trying to figure everything out. Everybody just rushed in and no one showered or put deodorant on or brushed their teeth. And it just was a big stank in that room and everybody's smoking. It's stuff you don't think about, but I think it really adds to the story and to kind of put yourself in there to feel what they were experiencing, Yeah.
Well, it was actually closer to 4 days.
Oh, was it? Wow.
Yeah, that was the accident took place Monday night, and Odyssey didn't settle down into the Pacific Ocean until Friday.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that was probably the best example of teamwork that was ever exhibited in Mission Control, because no one person, no matter what any movie might maybe kind of sort of lead you to believe, and I'm not going to get into that whole thing, but no one person was responsible. You there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, our lights just flickered again. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries.
But no one person was responsible for the safe return of that crew. That was, the flight dynamics people. They had to determine the trajectory of the spacecraft. The systems guys had to try to figure out a way to conserve their consumables like water. Most importantly, water, because they were running out of that pretty quick. They had to conserve their electricity, their power. So yeah, it was a pretty extraordinary story.
Yeah. So how, I'm not entirely sure about how does the organization of everything work? Because we always see, Mission Control where there's just every guy kind of has his own little station and everything. But then there's also, they're communicating with a team of theirs that's back somewhere else who's also doing something else. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, there was a flight dynamics section that dealt, like I said, with the trajectory of the spacecraft, and there were 3 consoles, 3 positions in that section. There was a systems section that dealt with the systems of both the command and service module and the lunar module. And then you had the Capcom, who was basically the astronaut who was in charge of actually talking to the crew. Mm-hmm. And each of those sections, the flight dynamics and the systems guys, each person that sat in the front room was connected to a back room called the staff support room.
Okay.
And they had very specialized people who maybe had a broader view of everything that was going on. They were kind of the Google of the time. They could put their fingers on the information that they needed, and it was up to the person in the front room to sift through that information and figure out what the best thing to do was.
Okay. I see. That makes sense.
So it was kind of a pyramid. It was kind of a pyramid of knowledge, basically.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I thought that I never really realized that about the Capcom who was essentially the one person who would communicate with the astronauts, right?
Yes.
And they were an astronaut themselves who trained with the astronauts up there, so they would be familiar with exactly the stuff that the astronauts up in the ship were familiar with, and the exact lingo and jargon and everything.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. That's so genius. I never knew that, but it makes total sense.
Well, it's kind of funny, the things that they thought of.
Yeah.
That needed to be done, and that was just, the Capcom being a fellow astronaut who spoke the same language was just one of the details that needed to come together to make this all happen.
Yeah, they just had so much foresight for things like that. It's just amazing to think through every little potential bottleneck like that, which it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah.
So what is, when we saw like the footage of the from the documentary, it looked like there's kind of the old mission control center where they still kind of have the same maybe older computers and stuff, but then is there a newer one that they had built with newer screen? Okay.
Yeah. The one that you're referring to, the older one, that was it wasn't Kennedy Space Center then, I don't think, but that was at Cape Canaveral. That was in Florida, because the launch pad and control room during Mercury was in Florida.
Okay.
The new mission control room in Houston went into effect the first flight of the Gemini program. I think what happened was the first flight of the Gemini program was actually controlled out of Florida, but Houston had backup capabilities. They were basically just monitoring the test and making sure all the equipment was working correctly.
Okay.
And then Gemini 4, Houston took over for good.
Okay, I see. So, Okay, so Houston is now, they just kind of kept updating that mission control room, and that's the one they use now and have used. But the one in Florida...
Well, it's not the same room now. It's in the same building. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So is the older one still kind of there in Texas?
The mission control room that controlled all the Apollo missions.
Yeah.
With the exception of Apollo 7, it was controlled out of an identical room on the second floor. The Apollo mission control room is on the third floor of the Christopher Kraft Mission Control Building.
Oh.
And it's actually in the process of being refurbished.
Oh. And
when I first visited the room, it was basically dead. None of the consoles were original to the time. None of them were powered up. The displays certainly weren't working. It was basically just an empty room, save for the consoles. What they're doing now is they've sent those consoles to the Kansas Cosmosphere where they're being refurbished and brought back up to period correctness. And they're in time for the 50th anniversary in July. They're going to have that mission control room set back up exactly like it was on that day.
Oh my gosh.
And I can't wait to see it because, like I said, every time that I've ever visited that room, it was, just basically, kind of dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I did get the chance to be a consultant and extra on the set of the First Man movie that was just released, a few months ago about Neil Armstrong,
right?
Ryan Gosling, and all that kind of thing. And I got to be an extra and a consultant on the mission control set. And when I went there, it was just, I can't begin to tell you how cool an experience it was when I stepped foot onto the set,
mm-hmm.
because it was very accurate.
Yeah.
They had papers and they had notebooks and they had ashtrays and they had food, and all the consoles were powered up and all the displays at the front of them were powered up. And it was kind of a cool situation.
Mm-hmm.
It was very cool to see that room, a representation of that room alive.
Yeah. Oh, so cool. And now we're going to get the real one brought back to the way it was. So is that going to be, is that just kind of a special thing, or is that going to be open to the public?
They're not going to be able to go in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably one of the issues that had kind of taken place before. People just kind of flopped down in the seats, and, I've actually seen, papers that people, trash that people had stuck up under the plastic.
Oh my gosh.
And just treated the place with disrespect.
Yeah.
Not everybody has the respect for history that I did that first time that I walked in. To a bunch of school kids, many times it's just another stop on a field trip. But most are not going to be allowed into the actual room, but they'll be able to go into the viewing room right behind.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, that sounds awesome. So I want to definitely check that out. Sounds really cool.
Oh yeah, it'll be extraordinary.
Man, well, Rick, this was so fun talking to you. I love this stuff. It's so interesting, and with the 50th anniversary coming up, it's great. So what's next for you? Do you have anything else planned, or what are you working on now?
Well, I'm kind of dipping my toes back into the NASCAR world. I've got a NASCAR history podcast that I truly love doing. I've got a project hopefully coming up that I'm truly excited about. I can't really say. Some of my NASCAR people might see this and let the cat out of the bag, but I'm kind of dipping my toes back into the NASCAR world a little bit.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, glad to see it. I could just tell from the smile on your face, it looks like you truly enjoyed it, and it seems very fun. So, I really appreciate you being on, Rick. Super fun to talk to you. I'm going to have links to all your books on Amazon in the show notes for folks to click on and check all those out. Is there anywhere else you want to send people to?
No, I'm good.
Okay, perfect.
If they want to listen to the podcast, that'd be great.
Yes. I'll definitely throw a link to the podcast too, the NASCAR podcast. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Well, Rick, truly super fun to talk to you. This stuff is it's just awesome. So thank you for being on and taking the time.
Okay, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that episode with Rick Houston, author of Go Flight. I certainly did. He had some really cool stuff to share. Definitely enjoyed it. And that was it. That's the end of the moon landing series. It's the 50th anniversary since we landed on the moon. Wow. This was really fun to go through and talk to all these guys. I seriously enjoyed it and learned a bunch. Got me super excited about NASA and space travel and going back to the moon and to Mars and everything that's going on. So hopefully you got a little bit of that too. But yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. If you want to share this 4-part series with your friends and family and other people. Appreciate that on social media or with your mouth. You can say it to them. That's it. Curiosityness.com is the website where we're at. Oh, and we're on social media at Curiosityness Podcast on Instagram. You can find us there. There's links to all this stuff in the show notes, so I won't talk about it anymore. But that's it. I'll see you in episode 62. Goodbye.